G'day and welcome back to Talking Leadership TV. Thank you for joining us again. I'm very much looking forward to sharing some new podcast content around this thing called leadership with you in 2024 and beyond. A little different to previous podcast outings around leadership pathway. I'll be looking at 3 new areas, including challenges to leadership, developing our leaders and entrepreneurs, and reflective leadership practice. I know you'll enjoy the insights and views from the guests that have agreed to share their wisdom with us. So without further ado, I would like to thank my first guest in this new podcast series, Anita Hobson-Powell. Anita spoke with us late into 2023 around her leadership pathway, and I asked her back to start this new podcast series looking at the issue of reflective leadership practice. And to begin with, Anita was the former CEO of Exercise and Sports Science Australia. She was in that role for 17 years, so with 2 decades of experience, she took that organisation to the heights that it's at the moment, and she's demonstrated a real commitment to health, sports and fitness. Her academic journey included a Bachelor of Applied Science in Human Movement, which was complemented by 2 master's degrees in both science and business. And she's also included in her studies a graduate certificate in company directorship, which added to her experience in the role has given her a profound understanding of both theory and practice in her area of expertise. Her influence is not only extended into what has been achieved at Exercise and Sports Science Australia. She's also the current serving chair of the National Alliance of Self-Regulating Health Professions and has also contributed significantly in the past through board positions with Gymnastics Australia, as chair of Gymnastics Queensland and as vice chair of Allied Health Professions Australia. I'd like to thank Anita for her time, but as always, enough from me. I would like to hand over to Anita to kick off the discussion around reflective leadership practice. Anita, thanks for joining me again, and I really do appreciate you coming back to the podcast. For those that haven't been watching or listening to the podcast, shame on you, and please engage with the content, particularly the discussion I had with Anita previously. And just offline, we're having a chat about some things, and the one thing that struck me when we first spoke is that I got the impression that you're a reflective kind of human being, and so ties in nicely with what I'm looking to do with extending those discussions around reflective leadership practice. So thank you for joining me again, mate.
No, welcome. No problems at all.
So this one is going to be what I'm calling, as much as you can in the time that we've got, a deeper dive into the world of reflective leadership practice, and that I firmly am in the camp of the belief that being a reflective leader practitioner is critical to being better at the craft of leadership, as well as providing a platform of sorts to review your own thinking and to try and make yourself not just a better leader, but a better human being, in sort of looking deeper inside yourself and saying, well, why did I make that decision? Or what could I have done differently? Or what needs to change in my own practice is going to make me better as a leader, and then in brackets, maybe a better human being in that role as a leader. My perspective, not yours, Anita. So can I start at the beginning by asking you, how did you grow your understanding of yourself as a leader?
I would say one of the key things was really doing some type of leadership course assessment annually, every second year where possible, where it sort of challenged you to understand and reflect on yourself as a leader. I would say I did this course in early 2023, which really focused on this, and some of the activities you had to do I had never really looked at in the past, but it really gave me some really strong insights as to who you are as a leader and how you show up. And so I'll just go through some of the activities because they're different. And I really, at the time, I just was like, why are we doing this? But it all sort of started to make sense as we got through the activity. So One was, just going through what your values are as a person, and how do you show up with these values? Because, you're at your work a third of your life, so there is going to be crossovers. And I think it makes a lot more sense is if you're displaying your values as a person in your leadership style. So, really be comfortable and understanding what your values are as a person. The next activity was you had to think about, you had this surprise 80th birthday party and who turned up. So the closest people that you've impacted on, who were they? And so you really had to sit back and go, gosh, across my life, who have I actually had an impact? And then you had to think of, well, what were they going to say to you? And so it really sort of, you had to sit back and close your eyes and really think about, how you've shown up to these people and the difference that you've made. And the last one, it was slightly morbid, but it just went that next step of you're at your funeral and you're looking down and what are people are saying. And you had to think about your leadership and again, your impact. And it was actually quite emotional, these activities. Around, like I said, one of them was quite morbid, but you really had to think about, well, how do you think people are perceiving you as a person? How are you having an impact on their life? Is this actually how you want to show up? And if it's not, what are you going to do about it? So you've got time to make changes in your life. So, it's a very different exercise to what we've probably traditionally done to think about yourselves as a leader and understanding yourselves. But you're putting yourself in a different context and really reflecting on, the impact on people's lives, because that's normally the time you hear about the impact that you're having on people. And I would say the last thing, and look, I've done many of these. There's probably every year, every second year, I do a different type of personality or leadership assessment. So I reckon I've done about 10 different ones over the years, and they tell you different things. But I think it helps you understand your style, how it's changed over time. So, I've been in a leadership role 17 years. How I was a leader and understanding my style when I first started to now is very different. So, what have I done differently? How am I showing up? How do, particularly when you do 360 ones, how does your immediate family see you show up versus your direct colleagues versus the next level down versus your board member, they all see you slightly differently. So, it gives you an understanding as to, well, is this the way you want to show up, or do you want to do something slightly different? So for me, it's just always being inquisitive and having that time set aside to go, right, I need to sort of check in on me and, is this who I want to be? And if it's not, what am I going to do about it?
That idea of what others think of you as a leader and what impact you may or may not have had on them can come to the fore, if I can use that as a way to segue into a couple of thoughts here around, you don't really know or don't really have a sense of your impact until key events might happen in your career. And again, this is just my perspective. So again, offline, we talked about you moving on to different things after, let's call it 2 decades of service to an organization, and all that would entail, and the massive amounts of work that you obviously put in that time, that until you leave that space, those questions become more prominent in your mind. And I would hazard a guess that you've impacted a lot of people in your time in your previous roles and in those roles that come up related to your previous role. And I, like you, think about these things in my opinion. For me, and this is about me, probably too much around what people thought of me. And when you do find out what that might be, good or bad, you put all sorts of attributions as to why that is, when in effect, a lot of the people you'll meet in your travels are probably acquaintances at the best and don't really know the real you. However, in your work, and this is where I think the key difference is that you have to bring your value set into your job. And if you're not reflecting your values, I think people's BS radar is attuned enough to know that this isn't the real person. I've got somebody here leading me, but they're not necessarily the person I thought they might be. And I would never counsel anyone to put on a false front, because that gets found out very quickly, except for those key narcissists in the world that we've all had to work with at one point or another that do that very well. But this podcast is not about those people. So, Anita, you did flag the next topic area around making time to reflect on your own practice. So this one's it's one question, but it's in two parts. Do you make time to reflect on your leadership practice, or do you reflect after key decisions or a key event?
Both for me. So for the first one, I definitely try and do some type of time out to reflect on my leadership style, do a course, go do a leadership assessment, just take that time. And often I would have end of year reviews with my president, and that was often one of the key times you would reflect on how you were going. But I was definitely, I wouldn't even say it was key events or key decisions. I would say almost daily there was some kind of reflection, if not daily, every second day, or a couple of times a week. It's sometimes it's a hour-long reflection. So you could be driving home and thinking about things, or when you go on a walk or something, or you're on the treadmill, I would be always thinking and reflecting on stuff. Or sometimes it was about a 2-minute reflection on something. So it really depended on I guess what I wanted to think about. But there's a couple of things there around, we were, as an organization, really trying to have reflective practice as a core principle within the organization. So it wasn't just to consider the organization and how we could do things better, but it was to give people the opportunity to also reflect on what they could have done differently, what did they do well. So and we had them in place after key events. Is we got together and we would look at those things. But there would be little things like how did I go when having a difficult conversation with someone, or how did a meeting happen with an internal external stakeholder? How did I present? How did I show up? How did I go at a board meeting? Did I get across the message I want? Did they understand? So I would always reflect on those situations. So for me, it was almost a daily habit of having some type of reflection. It's probably just part of my personality of always trying to do better, or being tough on yourself that you want to do better. But for me, I think that as a leader, you need to display that this is a core value that we want as an organization, that it is not, I think some people always see as, you're just going to get all the negative and criticism. It's not. It's the time where you hear where you're doing well as well. But it is, this reflective practice that leads to continuous improvement. And it's something that should be embraced. But I think a lot of people have this fear of what this looks like. So for me, I guess it sometimes it was alone time. Like I said, it was on my drive home, or I went for a walk. Sometimes, like you said before, as a CEO, it can be a very lonely role. So I had a couple of very close CEOs from other organizations that I would call and have a chat with, or a debrief. Sometimes they might have been involved with the situation and we'd talk about it. I've had mentors and coaches over the time, so sometimes it's been working through the reflections with them. Sometimes it's been with my husband, because he has a different view on the world as well. So, I wouldn't say there's ever one process, but for me is, making sure that it's part of my process, part of my leadership journey is, making sure that there is time to think about things.
I can, in some ways, understand why reflection sometimes is not at the forefront, given how busy some people are. And some people have made the argument to me in previous discussions around it's so busy just trying to get the doing of the work out of the way that reflection is a luxury. And I can understand that to a point, but if you don't reflect at any time, what does that lead to in terms of longer term sustainability as a leader, and whether or not you're open to learning from that process? And this is where this gets complicated in some senses, that if you don't have that ongoing lifelong learning approach to some of this, then reflection is maybe not something that's front of mind for you. Would you agree, disagree with that, Anita?
Yeah, look, I think probably going back to your earlier statement is I actually don't understand how you can be an effective leader of people if you're not doing reflective learning. Like you cannot get your connection with your team. You will have stakeholders. So for, the two of us, we're a membership body. So if we're not listening to our members and reflecting on how we're showing up for them, then are we doing a good job? So for me, that I think, it needs to be something that is in place. I don't think, when people say, oh, I don't have time, some of this literally is a 2-minute reflection on how is something gone, how did people react? You could ask yourself a simple question: how will people react to this? Will this lead to change? Could I do something differently next time? You can just ask yourself one question, and I think it leads to, that is reflective practice. It doesn't need to be this big rigmarole as to do it, but I don't think that you are enshrined with your people at all, at any level, if you're not using the feedback they're giving you, if you're not reading the room as to the body language that they're giving you. You do have to have some emotional intelligence in this space as well to do your reflective learning. But yeah, for me, it just needs to be enshrined in what you're doing. And if you're making an excuse, then I don't think you're a good leader at all. Sorry.
Yeah, 100%. And in fact, you make a really good point at the end there around what does reflection need to look like. And what I didn't want to do in branching out with this type of discussion, and it's well worth, I think, putting on the record that I'm not here, and I know you're not here to assess the quality of the reflection. Just the reflecting alone, I think, is a good starting point. You'll be your judge around whether or not the quality of that reflection meets a certain standard, and you'll get that feedback externally as time clicks along. And again, you've helped me segue to the next question around this idea that reflective practice is sometimes considered an individual pursuit. Do you take in external feedback to reflect on your own leadership practice? And before you answer, you've given some hints that you do, but I'll get it more formally as a response here, if that's cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it comes in different ways. So I'm going to say external feedback can be from internal people too. So I guess it's that just not you thinking, but I would ask direct questions of what could I do better, or how can I help you do your job better, or is my leadership style working for you? And getting that feedback, because, you could think something's working and then they're going, yeah, I don't like how you do this, or I prefer it if you showed up this way, or, give a little less advice on this. So, so I would ask direct questions, and sometimes that was formalized. So we would have these specific questions through probation periods. So your direct reports, you would be asking these questions. So you could actually help them do their jobs better. In their mid-year reviews, end-of-year reviews, there was always a question, and it was part of helping you reflect as a leader and what you could do better. So you kind of, it did force leaders to, in our organization at least, to take that on board. Whether they actually did in the end is, like you said, is a different situation. But I think there's also around getting feedback on your leadership style with stakeholders. So whether that's individually or as an organization, we actually engaged an external consultant to do a stakeholder sentiment piece of work to show, and one of a series of questions was, how were we leading the organization in the industry? What could we do better? And so it was very pointed questions around, how are we doing? How are we not doing? And sometimes you're like, oh, I'm a bit shocked as to how they see us as leaders. So I do think it is critical. However, I think before you do that, I think it's really critical that when you go down this pathway, that you are open. Like there's no point asking these questions or getting this external advice, and all you do is want to jump down someone's throat and defend what you're doing or argue back. And so what I used to do with my leadership team, I actually learned this acronym, and it was to use for a different strategy, but I actually thought it was a really good strategy here. And the acronym is called WAIT. WAIT. Why am I talking? So if you're trying to understand how you're doing and you're wanting this feedback, stop talking. Just listen. If you are not listening, if the only talking should be questions to get more information to help you, if you're going to go, but how come, why, any of those words, you're not reflective learning. You're being completely dismissive. And so, I have worked with some of my team over the time of just listen, ask questions to better help you understand, but don't react, don't be defensive. And that is a hard skill for some people. And some people just don't want to hear the feedback that have been given. It is hard. So I think as soon as you're going, I think external feedback is really important. But I think if you're not comfortable in that space, you need to come up with strategies to make it meaningful, to help you go through the process so that it actually is going to help you and you actually want to use that information.
Very insightful. I believe that argument, the discussion around not being able to take feedback, asks a lot of the individual leader, and the biggest ask for the leader is let go of your ego and let the feedback come in, because it's not, most times, 99% of the time, I believe the feedback that's coming back from external sources, whether they're outside the organization or from senior people or your board of directors internally, is to make the organization better by making and enhancing your leadership practice. And I think the hardest thing to do is let go of ego and not conflate feedback with feedback that is of a personal nature or something that's at your core. And this is where this, I think, gets tricky, is that, and I'm as guilty of this as the next person, is you bring a lot of yourself into the leadership role. And so when your process is questioned, are they questioning the process or are they questioning you? And if you can pull those two things aside, I think you can get some really good learning out of it. And I think the signal that's sent out within the organization that you're prepared to do that and or fess up and go, yeah, I stuffed that up, this needs to change. It suggests that you are human. You're not a superhuman that makes every decision is the correct decision, or at least perceived that way. And that brings other people in. Now, that all that being said, leaders are there to make decisions, and sometimes they're not going to be like that. It's not necessarily a reflection on your process, more that somebody didn't like an outcome to a particular process, and sometimes it's sort of suck it up, buttercup, because that's the nature of making decisions in leadership positions. But all the process behind that, I think that's open to discussion at all times. And like you said, and I'll agree with this, because there's no way I personally can disagree, is that you're going to have to take some good feedback with the not so good and look at it as constructive in that sense, rather than a destructive form of feedback. Because if you're at that stage in your own organization and all feedback is destructive, then you got other problems that have maybe nothing to do with the leadership and something more to do with the culture of the place. But that's a completely different discussion, not for right now. I'm very keen to understand what tips you can give other leaders around being an effective reflective practitioner.
Yeah, so I'll probably pull in a few things that we've already spoken about. It is that, you know, you need to see this as part of your tool belt that you as a leader are doing. So if you're not doing it, you need to start. And I would probably say the easiest is to start with big events, big decisions. You know, take 30 minutes after those to sit down, either individually or even with a team, to go through and reflect on how it went, how you made decisions, how you showed up, what you would do differently next time. But you know, I think you just need to then gradually increase it. But you know, my tip is, it doesn't need to be a big process all the time. Like I said before, some of it is asking yourself one question and you can get it done in 2 minutes. So, you know, no matter what it works for you, I think you need to just work out a system and start tomorrow. The other thing is making sure that people are aware that you're undertaking this process. So like I said before, is you could have this more formalized process in the organization, but you know, as a leader, you know, we want to display the behaviors we want throughout the rest of the organization. And as a leader, like you said before, is a lot of this process is to make sure the organization is doing better. So you want to make sure that the organization is going through this process. And as a leader, you also want to help your colleagues grow in their own ability. So you want them to do reflective learning as well. So for me, it is, you need to show that you're doing it. So, you know, it could be little things of what you say to them is, you know, I've reflected on our discussion, or I've reflected on a decision I made and this is what I've learned, or I've noticed at our meeting I was doing this and this is how you reacted, or, you know, you've taken on some feedback and you don't make a big deal of it, but you implement some kind of change to show you've thought about it and, yep, okay, I need to do this better and do stuff. So I think the key thing is you need to make sure that people are aware of what you're doing. And I'd go to that last one that I've talked about before, of the example of weight, is, you know, external feedback is critical, and you need to develop the skills to make sure that people are comfortable in giving you open, honest feedback. And if you're going to be a person that is really dismissive of what they're going to say, then they're going to stop it. So, make sure that you actually are listening and you are taking on board. And so sometimes you need to just give yourself space afterwards. I've had a couple of staff members, you kind of knew their behavior is you would have these discussions, give them feedback. They weren't happy at the time, and they'd come back 24 hours, sometimes 48 hours, without a doubt, and go, I've thought about what you said and I agree, and blah, 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 blah. So you kind of get to know what people are like when you're giving feedback, or some of it will take it on board straight away. But you'll know and you'll work out. Like I said, I had these two staff. Like one, it was 48 hours. The other was 24 hours. They would come around and they would go, yep, I've thought about it. Yep, you're right. This is what I'm going to do instead. So, you know, I think that's important when you're dealing with getting external feedback, is how are they going to react? How are you going to react? Are they going to know that you're going to need 24 hours to talk to them about it again? Or are you going to make it a pleasant experience? And they go, yeah, I'm happy to rock up to their door and give them the feedback anytime.
Yeah, very, very hard but fun decisions to be involved with getting your staff into a situation where they feel that they're comfortable enough to have those conversations. Because I think these discussions, and I might get your perspective on this if I could, that if you've developed, created, fostered, whatever the best word is here, an environment where it's a safe enough, I hate the word safe space, a safe enough environment to have those conversations, then all things are on the table within reason and the discussion can be a productive one. What I think sometimes leaders miss, and I've had people give me feedback on this in their own practice, is that there's always this power relationship between the boss and those subordinates in an organization. So how much your reports are going to actually be willing to give up is I think a variable of how long they've known you and whether or not you've built up an environment of trust. And I think once you get to that stage, it makes it a lot easier to have those conversations. And there can be difficult ones around reflecting on not just your own leadership practice, but those of others, because I think what you're alluding to is as you're helping others to develop their own practice, then if they see you doing this, then that's a pretty big indicator that this is something you need to be thinking about in your own practice as a way to get either better decision making, achieve goals, whatever that end point might look like. So words of wisdom there, Anita. Thank you for your time. This has been great, mate.
No worries. Thank you. Like you alluded to, yes, I do like to think probably way too much. But I just think it's critical if you're going to move the organization forward, if you're going to grow as a person. But as I mentioned, half our job as leaders is to grow those around you. And so, you need to help them and display what's good leadership.
Agreed. For those listening, I've been speaking to Anita Hobson-Powell. Again, Anita, thank you for joining me today.
No problems. Thanks for the invitation, Eric.
Thanks everyone for either watching the video cast or listening to the podcast. A lot more of this content to come, including some other areas of leadership that we'll be exploring into the rest of 2024. Thanks again. Have a good day, rest of your week, and we'll catch everyone on the next episode of Talking Leadership TV.